My daughter was the youngest premature baby to ever survive in Ontario. When she was born, she weighed less than 2 pounds, 800 grams. And the poor little thing slept in the palm of my hand for the first 3 days of her life. And I can remember going in a washroom at the hospital in London, Ontario, St. Joseph's, and getting on my knees. And it's hard for me to cry, ironically, I could tell another story. But I sobbed uncontrollably in that bathroom and pleaded with God not to take Laurel's life, because my mom, who had been the head of the anesthetic department at Sick Children, said to me, my mother was a nurse, and she said, Davy, don't get your hopes up. It's not likely she'll survive. And the doctors at that point had never dealt with such a young child. And the truth is that she was a brilliant little fighter, but she had to change every drop of blood. She had what was called bradycardia, spelled Brady, and which I always thought was odd, where her heart would stop, and I'd have to, the first week of this was just torture for me, because she had tubes in her skull, tubes in her face, tubes in her, the poor thing, honest to God, she was intubated. And eventually we were able to get her out, and she's ended up being the most beautiful, unbelievably brilliant, graduated with honors from York University. And that, for me, was the most important prayer that was ever answered. And my son Brendan is how I got faith. And I said, if there's a God, I need to understand, why do things happen, horrible things happen to people. And my brain trying to understand why horrible things happen to people, I couldn't. If there's a God, like how does in what happened in Southeast Asia a few years ago with the tsunami, how do you explain the Second World War with Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, where 30 million of his own people are slaughtered? How do you explain these events that transpire, the World Trade Center? I mean, if there's a God, come on, what kind of thing is this? Except Brendan was born with 180-degree club feet. And he was going south and his feet were going north.
Wow.
And I had to take him from the age 6 days down to Sick Children's Hospital. And for the first 6 months, every week they would take his feet and twist them 180 degrees and put them in a cast. And at 6 months, they did an operation where they cut him from stem to stern across the back of his heel, sliced his tendons, and stuck steel pins in. And what happened after that operation is, when I took him back to that hospital, as we walked through the doors, he looked up and you could see the terror in his face. And he started sobbing and screaming. And the doctor said, you need to hold him on the table. And honest to God, I held him on the table, and I again started crying because he was so afraid. And then it hit me like a tsunami that Brendan didn't understand. I loved him so much, I wasn't going to let him go through life crippled. And you see, he needed to be held on that table so that they could do the work to fix his feet, so that one day he would end up being a national champion swimmer.
So in the process of that, of course, you've had a spiritual kind of revelation, several spiritual revelations around your son. And then around with your daughter. So, describe a bit, you learned something about prayer, and maybe you can elaborate on that. Or what did you learn about prayer?
Well, here's what I learned about prayer, that prayer works. And, I felt very angry at God most of my life because of what happened to me as a child with my own father. So the idea of a loving father, our father, I found it repugnant because it just shocked me. I mean, I can't imagine praying to my father because he was not a loving dad. Now, I recognize today that my dad was very sick. So the prayer for me, that when I became aware of prayer as a tool, I began to see the power in it. And, the thing about prayer that I've discovered is that scientifically, we know, for instance, on healing, that there have been numerous studies done that are available on the internet. You can go on Google and look at this. People who are prayed for heal much faster than people who don't, for instance. My background is as a behavioral scientist. I was trained that way. So I look for empirical evidence. There is empirical evidence that prayer works. Yeah. I shouldn't be sitting here with you tonight, Roy. I absolutely shouldn't be here. By all my young years, I took so many chances and came so close to death so many times that it's a miracle that I'm sitting here today. The fact of the matter is that prayer changed my life.